Strange but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. What follows is a confession of sorts, a small collection of tales that an SBT subscriber and longtime viewer kept secret most of his life, all of which happened to him in one of his many family homes, a place that he can only think of now as the Bad House. I feel it's time that these stories were told and made known in case others might benefit from knowing that as children, we were not alone in such experiences. Experiences, more often than not, simply brushed away by adults as the products of an overactive imagination or childish foolishness. When I was about 7 years old, in that period my now grandchildren refer to as the olden days, my brother, mother, and I were unceremoniously uprooted from the only home that we had ever known and moved across the northeast of England to a new house. It happened overnight. My father had been in a foul mood for days, more bad-tempered even than usual, which, believe me, for him was a notable feat, as he could easily fly off the handle into a red-faced, temple-vein-bursting rage for something as little as the volume on the TV being too loud. It was not until many years later that I discovered the actual reason for us leaving our first house. Lack of money was the biggest reason, and my father blamed my mother for not being able to unnaturally stretch the tiny housekeeping allowance that he gave her. The new house was 2 towns over and was considerably smaller than we were used to. We parked the car outside of the corner property, and my dad, still staring straight ahead, asked, "Well, what do you think?" My mom asked, "Can we go in and have a look at it before we make a decision?" "Look all you like. Decision was made. I bought it this morning." He opened the car door, got out, and strode towards the front door, the lord of the manor, seizing the spoils of conquest. "What do you mean?" she began before realizing that she was yelling at a closed car window. She opened her side door and she stepped out on the pavement. "And I get no say in this?" she called after him. "Nope," he said as he opened the door and stepped inside. My brother and I got out of the car and fell in behind our mom, heading into the new to us, but not so new house to everybody else. There's an odor unique to houses that have stood empty for some time, a mix of dust, stagnant floorboarding, and stale dampness, and this place smelled like that, only far stronger. I did not know it at the time, but in the years to come I was to encounter that stench a lot as we moved from house to house to house, but never as bad as inside Chatsworth. My mom was concerned about being able to afford even a smaller place like this. My dad just told her to not worry about it, and that he would be handling the finances from that point forward. This house was odd. It had once been a 2-bedroom house, but an extension had been built onto the back of the property, pushing the kitchen out by about 10 feet with an extra bedroom on top of it. This new bedroom, however, did not reach as high as the actual roof, but ended in a protruding arched roof of its own some feet lower than the actual roof. This oddly shaped enclosure, as it turned out, was eventually to be my room, though it didn't start out like that. The first night we spent there, I heard my mother crying in the kitchen, and me, being a somewhat sensitive child, left my brother playing and went to check on her. I had only heard my mother cry twice before, and on both occasions members of her family had died. "Mom?" I asked. "What's wrong?" Well, she made a fuss of drying her eyes and suppressing her tears before smiling at me and telling me that nothing at all was wrong. "No one's dead, are they?" I asked. "No, of course not. Why would you think that?" So I explained to her that the only time I ever saw her cry was when Great Uncle George had died and when her friend Anne had been killed in a car crash. Well, she hugged me and told me everything was going to be fine, nothing was wrong, and that I should go help my little brother wash his hands before supper, as Daddy would be home from work soon, and she had to get it on the table, as Dad liked his meals hot and on the table when he came in. I knew better than to disobey. After dinner, she put us to bed and knelt between our beds to say prayers with us. I can still recall today that foul and bone-chilling prayer. You know the one about, if I should die before I wake, I beg the Lord my soul to take. I think I must have asked her at least once, was I likely to actually die in my sleep? And I'd been so terrified by the answer that she gave me about hell, damnation, fire, and the devil seizing my soul if I had not pledged it to the Lord in my nightly prayers. I never questioned it again. That night the first incident happened, though. It was merely a precursor to what was to become 18 months of hell in that house. I don't know how long I had been asleep. Long enough for it to have gotten dark outside, not long enough for the sounds of the television to have stopped downstairs. What woke me was the sound of my brother calling my name. However, he was not calling it. He was forcing it out between sobs. Crushed, quiet sobs, the weeping of a child too terrified to speak loudly for fear of being noticed. Without opening my eyes, I muttered, "What's the matter?" "What is it?" he answered. I turned over, and I saw a single stream of light from the street lamp outside falling on the ghostly image of a coffin between our beds. It was an open casket, lined with shining fabric, nestling an old man with a face like wax. As I watched, the man simply faded away, vanished, and then, supported by unseen hands, appeared above the box again and was laid gently within. I watched this whole scenario play out perhaps a dozen times that night in the darkness. I waited for it to stop, staying as silent as I could. Finally, the ghostly image of the old man was laid to rest for the final time, and the whole vision faded from sight. At breakfast the next morning, I decided to tell my parents what my brother and I had seen. There was a man in a coffin in our room last night. My father gave me a long, peculiar look. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "In our room last night, I woke up and there was a man in a coffin. An old man, like Granddad." "I knew we shouldn't have taken these two to the funeral," he barked at my mom. "We could not have taken them," she objected. "I just wondered if it was someone who used to live here, that's all," I interrupted. "I don't want to hear any more of this rubbish, understand? And if I hear you talking about ghosts ever again, there will be no more comics or TV for a month. Got it?" Several years later, my mother told me that my dad was actually deathly afraid of anything dark in nature. They had seen Psycho at the movie theater, and for months after, he had refused to fetch coal from the bunker in the backyard out of fear. For the remainder of the time that I shared that room with my brother, I kept my eyes tight, shut, all night long, and if I ever did wake up, I never looked about. Which was when the voices started. When I say voices, I don't mean voices in my head. I mean actual, physical voices that I heard with my own ears. They called my name over and over and over. There was a sweet old lady voice, a nasty, vicious young woman's voice. There was a man's voice that was stern but pleasant. And then there was the nasty kid voice. All just calling my name, all ordering and shouting, cajoling, until I buried my head under my thick feather pillow and tried to blot them out until they all stopped. Around this time, I asked Dad if I could have the spare room as my own, and to my surprise, he said yes. And so I moved into that back room. To this day, I find the memory of the unnatural shape of that place disturbing. It must have been designed by some insane Hieronymus Bosch acolyte. The door opened out, for a start, and there was no door frame on the left-hand side. It was simply flush to the wall. The ceiling was arched and followed the contours of the supplementary roof outside. The walls were short, at barely 5 feet 5 inches, before sloping upward for another 18 inches, and none of the walls were plumb, giving the bulk of the room an odd rhomboid shape. The rest was spoiled by the fact that directly facing the room door was a built-in closet so deep and boxed off that, Had the room door opened the correct way, no one would have been able to get comfortably in or out. It was a horror of a room, wallpapered with sickly pastel blue and pink wallpaper featuring endless lines of somber children in shorts, shirts, and summer dresses that all of which held no joy at all. They were holding hands and in a never-ending daisy chain between them, staring out with dead, longing eyes into the real world that they could never enter but would ever covet. I don't know why I wanted to stay in this place, but it was my own. One small window let in light and a view over the back garden, perhaps 2 feet wide by 3 feet high, and bordered with a rotted sill painted over many times with white gloss paint. A window that did not and would not ever open. I placed my bed under the window so that I faced the one blank wall between the closet and the back wall, a small chest of drawers by my bedside, and my clothes hung in the closet. My one small bookshelf filled with every book and magazine that I owned at the time at the foot of my bed. My father placed a poster of Formula One racing cars on the back of the door in a vain attempt to foster an interest in motorsports. Despite all of this, I could close the door, turn on the light, and be content in that room, free of bickering parents, the insistent demands of my small sibling, and the constant arguing over the television. At least, for a short time. From that first night that I slept in that room, I was plagued by a recurring nightmare. In this oddly lucid dream, I found myself wandering in a strange alien landscape, best described as a maze of glowing coral walls that bubbled and blistered in places, and in others sprang out in clutching forest branches of spindly twig-like protrusions, spiny fingers of some alien beast, but topped with swelling, verdant, acid-green globules reminiscent of seaweed. Among this twisting labyrinth moved creatures, some tiny and skittering, others large and lumberous. These entities respectively skittered and crawled to the filthy sound of their own nature, the small ones to a discordant tinkling or jingling sound that was not so much heard as felt, setting one's teeth on edge and crackling with galvanizing blue fire, a sensation like chewing on tinfoil while an electrical current was passed through it, ripe with ozone and zinc. The larger creatures occasionally summoned forth from within themselves a low tone that resonated with the frequency of my own heart and innards, setting them pulsing and threatening to shatter them like glass, pushing the breath from my lungs and stringing my brain with the worst imaginable of migraines, so long as the sound persisted. I can recall waking from one such ordeal to the sound of scratching, a small repeated scratching. And as the days went by, these irritations moved from one corner of the room or another, sometimes moving about from under the floorboards, or even up on the roof. I had just about convinced myself it was birds when it would move, and I would be convinced it was rats or mice, and then it would come from halfway up the closet door on the inside. It was irritating. I would just mutter, "Oh, shut up," and try to go back to sleep. The one night that annoying noise woke me up again and revealed itself, I had for once been sleeping peacefully. Such was the ironic and cruel humor of that house. Scratch, scratch, scratching, this time coming from somewhere close to the foot of the bed, moving across the room from the window side toward the closet side, slowly and patiently. I decided finally to take a look at the culprit. However, as I sat up, the scratching changed direction, and though it took me a moment to realize it, it began climbing the wall. I laid my head back and waited. Suddenly, a hand, severed at the wrist, crawling up the wall. I watched, horrified, as the thing made its way and yet seemed to show no interest in me whatsoever. And then, it just sank into the wall, swallowed up by the house itself, with only the faintest sound of distant and indistinct cackling. In my very young brain, I seemed to decide that since the horrible thing had not approached me or done me any harm, and had presumably been there for weeks now, it posed no danger to me, so I decided to stay where I was and try to go back to sleep. I did, however, for the first time, issue my own simple plea for protection in my sleep. 2 days before my father announced that we were moving again, I heard my mom and dad talking in the kitchen. Dad was angry and shouting, of course. "Look, the kids are asleep. It will be 5 minutes." She didn't want to leave us alone in the house, even for a second. "What do you think is going to happen to them? They're inside, the door's locked. Now will you just get in the car?" he yelled. "This is important." There was no more noise until the door opened, closed, and was locked. A moment later, the car started and drove away. I lay in bed, knowing I was alone. Though I could hear my brother softly snoring from the other room, he was only 5 years old, so no help there if anything happened. I stayed still in my bed and wondered how long before the parents returned. What had called them away? Was I safe? I opened my eyes and watched the bedroom curtain slowly darken as the last rays of the sun sank over the garden. It was so quiet. And then I heard the door handle click, and the door swing open on its squeaky hinges. There was presumably nobody in the house but me and my 5-year-old brother. I closed my eyes tight and pretended to be asleep. Soft footfall on the carpet. I was no longer alone in my room, but oh, how I wished I was. I heard 3 steps in the small room, and I knew that whoever it was stood only inches away from my bed, looking down over me. One more step and I was overcome with a sudden, ominous sense of malevolence. The creature exuded it. I could feel pure fury, hate, frustration, evil. This man or thing wanted to hurt me. I knew without any doubt that given the opportunity, it would visit on me all the tortures of hell. I felt like it wanted to see me in pain. It wanted me terrified. It wanted me damaged. Yet despite my dread, I wanted to see it. I had to know who or what it was that was in my room. I forced apart my eyelid 1/fraction of an inch, and there I saw him. Tall, much larger than my father, glowering over me from the darkness. He seemed like a 3-dimensional shadow freed from the prison of a wall or lighted surface, a shape of darkness in the darkness, and yet free of it. Cloaked in a long coat or cape and shadowing his face with the brim of a wide hat. I could not tell or see, but I knew he was aware that I had seen him and of the terror that it had brought to my young heart. And he was happy with himself. I began whispering ritually, "Oh God, oh Jesus, oh God, oh Jesus, oh God, oh Jesus, oh God, oh Jesus," over and over and over. But I only heard the thing laughing with joy that I was terrified. At that moment, the front door opened and my father's voice proclaimed, "See, I told you we wouldn't be long." The thing leaned its shadowed face to mine, growled, and flashed yellow, sharp, reptilian-like teeth before vanishing. I would encounter this thing many years later, but that's a story for another time. Before and after we moved, I tried talking to my mother about the dreams and visions that I had experienced, but she refused to discuss them with me, warning me that such talk was bad and would only make things worse. I hardly understood what that meant, but assumed that since she didn't call me stupid or over-imaginative as my father did, that she too knew something was not quite right at Chatsworth. This has been another strange but true story, sent to us by a longtime subscriber to SBT. So tell us what you think of this story in the comments below. And have you had a similar experience? If so, we would love to hear about it. Send us your strange but true paranormal experience in an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Subscribe if you haven't already, and sign up for notifications so you know when the next video drops to the channel. Thanks for watching this video. I'm Steve White. Until next time.